I remember watching the movie's Avatar when it first came out in the theater. My buddies and I went full fan mode going to that movie. We were not wrong to do so, and it was pretty much brilliant as we sat in, and the experience that we had watching the movie was beyond expression. And as the movie finished, it was something that we loved way beyond what we could imagine, and we were so excited that we were ready to do a full dive into the world of extraterrestrial, and the buddies and I decided to look for ourselves the evidence of their existence. Now that we had seen the film, there was something inside us that was pushing us to look into the matter, as to research it and look forward to it and how it could work. And how can we actually be able to figure certain things about their existence or their knowing? Now, to keep in mind, we were not scientists and we were not researchers. We were just some guys who had seen Avatar, and we thought that maybe there are people like that living among us, aliens and extraterrestrials. And since we were really close to the Roswell site, we knew that we will be able to find something. Some story that will confirm the presence of the aliens. But there is the issue where military often finds ways to interject between these researches. And only thing that we were scared about was knowing things and not being able to tell the world, because the military will get to us and probably disappear us from the face of the earth. And there were these so many scenarios that we had built up that there were in no way happening, or even if they were, we were just blowing them out of proportions. And all of that not because we were a man of science or belonged to that field, but because we saw a really good movie about it. Avatar became the inspiration of our great journey into finding the unknown. And we decided to make it a week trip. And we made a decision that if we didn't find anything, we will return. We booked an RV and started our journey. But first, we took enough supplies for us to last for weeks. We took the updated map and decided to mark the places that we wanted to look into it. We couldn't just make it an everyday thing, so we had to do it all in a week and then move on with our work. Now that all our resources were gathered up, we were ready to make the trip, and we started. We started this trip, and first thing we did was take a stop at the motel park so we could park our RV and stay the night before we head deep into the unknown desert. We had no idea what was in store for us until one of my friends came in, and he was frantically looking at the sky and said, I saw it! It was the sighting! It's them! It's them! Definitely them!" We immediately knew what he was talking about, and we started our RV and then decided to trail the sight he had saw. And then, as we were doing that, we realized it was too dark and we were too much deep into the parts where trailing wasn't enough. We were almost going blind into the place that was off maps. The roads were all off grid, and we had to dump the car because there was no road. We had to take the road on foot because we were not ready to get the RV into jeopardy, since the RV was rented and we could possibly not risk losing the security. So we trailed on foot, hoping to see what the trails were like. But then the unexpected happened, and we were not aware of the trouble that we were going into. And then we all, one by one, fell into this hole that we didn't see coming. Each and every one of us fell into that hole one by one, and we thought that it was one of those secret government holes, and we realized that we were slipping into it, and then saw that it was completely abandoned. At the time, we took a relief. We were just relieved that we were not in any mortal danger. And then I saw that the place seemed to be in changing, and all that stuff was being moved, or was in the middle of being moved, when I saw the markings on the door. It wasn't in symbols, and we had no idea what it was. And I was looking towards it and moved in. It got out, and then scanned me, and the voice said, "Humans approaching the bay door." And as the computerized voice said that, the door opened. And as the door opened, it led into another gallery, and from the gallery into a balcony. And as we walked towards it, we lost our mind and could not believe what we were seeing. The balcony opened itself to a different world. It was like Earth, but there were forests and rivers, and most importantly, some bases were built in between those, and we could not believe ourselves. It was unreal. and as we walked down the balcony, we saw that there were things like Hyperloop already working at their maximum efficiency there. And we realized, but were too scared to admit the fact that humanity was being helped after all. And the amazement, the real moment of wonder, was seeing these green human-like creatures who were rebuilding this really large wall. And we were just amazed and bewildered by this notion that how can an ecosystem like that exist in such a small place? And there were definitely questions that we wanted to ask. And next thing you know, this alarm went off. New humans detected. And then, just in a couple of hours, there were people, and the aliens, I guess, surrounded us. And as soon as they did, they decided to look at us and ask, "You have two options now. You leave your life and you forever work with us, or we wipe your memory." There was this curiosity that wanted me to go work for them, and even my buddies reconsidered. But our life back home, however miserable they might seem, were worth the hopes. So we chose to get our memories wiped off. As they were doing the flash thing through imaging, I guess it got unnoticed and I sneezed. And when I did, I realized nothing happened to me. And I acted that way my friends did. They had no clue, but I remembered it all. And to this day, I keep this a secret.
It all happened when I was babysitting for this family in my town. Their daughters were 6 and 10. I was 16 back then. I ordered the pizza, and we all ate that, and then went on to play video games for the next hour or so, until Mabel, the young daughter, wanted to sleep. Mabel slept, and Violet, who was the older one, discussed the idea of watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I don't know if her parents would have allowed that. I even wondered why they even hired a babysitter, since Violet was pretty responsible herself. But the matter of fact, I agreed to watch the Nightmare at Elm Street. Did not want to look like an uptight dude. So we started watching it, and I brought in popcorn. She was pretty terrified, and we were sharing the blanket on our feet, quietly enjoying the movie. At around midway in the movie, we started hearing rustling noises on the outside. At first, I thought maybe their parents were home, so I told her to switch to The Princess Bride so I don't get scolded for showing a horror flick. As I got, there was nothing. I got back inside and she was on the phone. It was her parents. They said they'd be late. The roads have been blocked and there is a rumor that the power will go shortly. They ordered me to go back and instructed the daughter to shut the doors and sleep. She told me that I just couldn't shake the feeling of leaving both of them alone. So I stayed with them, just to make sure. We stood there talking about things. She was smarter than her age, and she asked me all the questions about school and stuff, and we ended up doing her homework. And the power just went off cold, but we were ready. I told her to go to her sister, and she did. I stood down and locked all the doors and windows. It felt like a storm would build up. I went up and informed her about everything. 3 of us gathered around the TV, so it could be easier in case we had to make a run for things or cover. We got together to talk about things while Mabel slept. It was like one of those slumber parties that we had as a kid, and we chatted a lot, until the room started shaking. It felt like it was an earthquake. I quickly made Rabel and Violet go take a cover, and did it myself. I rolled on the flashlight to them, and told them to make way for the door outside. Before all the shaking, they made their way to the door, and we stepped outside. It was just the 3 of us, and a couple more people, since everybody was already out of town due to vacations. And as we stepped outside, we turned on the flashlights. Violet was holding me tightly, and I was carrying Mabel as she closed her eyes. Violet closed her eyes all the time too. And in a few minutes, a stream of lights made the night sky bright, and as it happened, I told Violet to open her eyes. It was beautiful. It seemed like a big flat square disc making its way to the sky, It was flying way closer than most flying vehicles, as an airplane or gliders or helicopters did. I and Violet and Mabel kept looking at it, mesmerized. The sky was all red, and soon, as we were in awe, we were terrified. As it rained fire from the rear of that unidentified object, almost as if it was crashing, I held the girls with all my grip strength, and we ran towards the house and took cover. We huddled together beneath the table, wrapping ourselves with Mabel's blanket. After an hour later, we went outside. The smoke from that flying object withered the whole city invisible, and the redness of its light was still there. Our town looked exactly like that upside down from Stranger Things. This was the memory that Stranger Things brought for me. Mabel and Violet's parents were very grateful, and I did not leave as they arrived at around 8 in the morning. The UFO was a government spacecraft mission that failed and crashed at an abandoned site not far from our town. I shortly moved to New York that next summer. Moving forward to 10 years, I was 26 and out on a date. My date came in and introduced herself. We lived in a small town. It was Violet. She was 20 and was studying at NYU. We started dating, and the first thing we discussed was the night that it all happened. We have been married for 4 years now, and it all came back to us when we binge-watched the Stranger Things, almost as if it had a part of our life somewhere in it.
No matter how much I wish it wasn't, this story is completely true. I wasn't drunk and I wasn't high on any drugs. Neither was my friend, but I fear his state of mind might have been permanently altered due to his experience with these beings. Secondly, I like to consider myself a rational, thinking type of person with years of experience hunting and hiking around my hometown in Wyoming. I've seen all kinds of fauna and flora, so I didn't confuse what I saw for something entirely different. It all started when I went to a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. He was turning 18, and I was already 18 myself. His uncle, a man more native to the land than myself, was 27. Let's call this friend James. I finally got to his house at about 4 p.m. that night. It was January 25th. Since he effectively lived in the middle of nowhere and at the foothills of the Rockies, I was keen on bringing something with me in case I ran into some trouble, like a bear or something of the like. So I brought along with me a .357 Magnum and some binoculars in case my friend wanted to try and hunt some coyotes with this .223 rifle. We started doing our normal routine for most of the day, playing games on his computer, watching some TV, and just chilling out and talking about school. His parents were away on a business trip to a nearby town, so they left James and his uncle the house to themselves. The thing that James loved the most in the world was easily his dogs. He had 2 chocolate labs and a golden retriever. The retriever was actually fairly old. This being Wyoming and people not really giving a hoot, the dogs were left out all day. They came and went as they pleased back to his house. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we heard his dogs begin barking at something off in the distance. At this point, the sun was long gone, but the full moon gave an amazing amount of light. I looked through the nearby window in the direction of the dogs barking. Even with the moon shining against the snow, I could not see anything up to the tree line that was nearly a mile away. "There's nothing there," I said. "Are you sure? They don't even bark at deer anymore," James whispered to me. The whole situation was weird. Fast forward an hour, and his dogs have not been heard or seen since the barking started. His uncle was buzzed and watching something on their huge TV. James was beginning to worry that something happened to his dogs. Now, wolves can still be dangerous in the Rockies, and they have no problem taking down a random dog that wanders into the woods. This is the moment where I started to get anxious, partly because he wanted to get his dog back, and partly because wolves sometimes kill sheep or even cows, so if they were desperate, I'm sure they would have no problem with us. Even still, those dogs were his family, so we grabbed our guns and we headed outside. We were armed with heavy clothing, as well as my .357, the binoculars, and his .223 rifle. We braced ourselves, and we headed out into the Wyoming winter, with temperatures 20 below freezing, going the direction of where we last saw his dogs. The whole time we walked toward the tree line, my veins were being flooded with adrenaline, the same feeling I got every time I hunted, but tonight we definitely weren't hunters. We were about 300 yards away from the tree line when James suddenly stopped. With my eyes trained on the ground and looking for signs of an animal, I almost ran into him. He just stared at the tree line. He kept whispering for me to look at the trees. Slowly, he raised his left index finger towards the foothills of the mountains. As soon as he knew I was looking towards the trees, he readied his rifle and pointed it towards them. I noticed at this point that his breathing was extremely rapid and raspy, like he just witnessed a fatal car crash right in front of him. At that point, I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. I scanned the tree line over and over. I crouched down to sit on the snow. I used the binoculars towards where he pointed. It took me about 30 seconds, but eventually I saw what scared the hell out of him. There was something out there, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't his dogs. Something on 4 legs came out from behind a tree at the edge of the forest. It must have been about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Of course, at first I assumed it was a wolf, or maybe even a small bear. A few seconds later, several more of these things came out of the woods. I didn't pause to try and count them, but there was at least 6 or 7, and who knows how many more were hiding in the trees still. We watched them slowly walk out of the trees for several minutes. These animals seemed strangely cautious or slow for whatever reason. Maybe they were scared of people. Then they eventually stopped as a howl from a dog or wolf came out from behind us. It was far enough away for us to not worry about it, but close enough for the unknown animals out there to hear the howl as well. I looked back through the binoculars and could almost make out the general texture of these creatures. They were now about 275 yards away. They looked pale and thin. They still appeared to be something like wolves or even large dogs. But my heart began to race when I saw what they did next. These things, whatever they were, picked up their pace fast, reaching speeds of what looked like 15 to 20 miles per hour, judging from how fast they closed their distance to the direction of the howl. And coincidentally, this was almost right at us. After a minute or so, James lost it and tried to get up to run away. I grabbed him and threw him on the ground as he started to run, but this caught the attention of the beasts, and they stopped. James and I, frozen with fear, sat down in the snow, weapons ready. I almost lost it as well when I noticed that the eyes of these things reflected the moonlight. They were orange in color. They didn't really glow like in some stories of cryptids. They were more piercing. We stared at them, and they stared back at us for what seemed like hours, until one of these creatures stood up on its back legs. At this moment, all of my knowledge on hunting and animals was meaningless. I knew that some animals could stand up on their back legs, but they could never do it very long. I audibly counted to see how long it stayed like that. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then James screamed and pointed his .223 to the right. I looked in his direction, and I saw a creature on the left side of the group begin to get up, and it ran away from the pack. Dumbfounded, I turned my attention to the rest of them, and I told James to keep watching the one that ran away. I do a quick count of the ones that remained, the ones that were staring us down. There were only 4. My heart pounded out of my chest. There was no way we could have lost something so large on these plains. They're completely flat and covered in snow. I looked to our left, and then I saw it. It was crouched down and trying not to be seen. I realized how smart these things were, much smarter than I would have ever expected. These things, they were flanking us. I whispered to James my suspicions of what's going on, and he had the same thought. I made up a quick plan in my head, and I relay it to James, our best course of action. I told him to start backing away slowly, but to always maintain eye contact. As soon as I finished telling him my idea, I do another quick count. Now only 3 pairs of orange eyes. Another one went somewhere. The one that first stood was starting to walk towards us. I helped James up and I told him to keep an eye on our right side, while I looked to the left. We backed away, but these beasts walked with us, maintaining their distance the whole time. Eventually, we were only about 100 yards from his house before we turned and ran to his front door. We booked it towards his porch lights, no longer caring to be coy about the situation. Foolishly, I stopped 50 feet short of the porch, and I turned around. Maybe it was curiosity. I don't know, but I regretted it the moment I did it. My body seized up the moment I saw it. Those creatures stopped as soon as I made eye contact. With the creatures ever so slightly illuminated by the porch lights, I realized that these things seemed otherworldly. They were tall, probably 6 or 7 feet, and they were insanely thin and lanky, almost like a basketball player. They were so pale, and they stared right back with these intense orange eyes from before. I just looked back, less afraid but more curious, and a few seconds later, James screamed, "What are you doing?" I pulled myself out of the weird trance I found myself in, and I sprinted towards his house. I jumped inside and bolted the door, all while his drunk uncle swore at us for making too much noise. I looked out of the windows with my gun in hand, but I didn't see a thing. Nothing but fresh tracks. I pulled the curtains back where they were, and we heard the strangest noise, anything other than a person I've ever heard. It sounded like a dog's howl, but it repeated, almost like it was coming from a Siamang gibbon, in repeated pulses in different pitches and tones. The uncle looked like he instantly sobered up after hearing it, and he started locking all the doors and windows in the house. To our surprise, all of James's dogs were back, but they were very frightened and confused, cowering in a corner. We watched through the windows for almost the entire night, until I eventually needed to fall asleep, but we never had any other problems since. Whatever these things were, they were fast, they were smart, and they were nothing I've ever seen before. It looked like some strange dog man straight from tribal legend. I'm not a superstitious type of guy, but I hope it was somehow just a really elaborate dream, even if my friend and his uncle can recall the night too.
I was a young child at the time, but I wasn't the only person in my house to have an odd experience. I mentioned this previously on this subreddit when discussing what kind of demon this was, and someone recommended a book, which I bought, but to no avail, as it didn't have any type of spirit or demon matching this disgusting figure. So yeah, I've given up that search. I'm unsure of my age in this, as I was so young, 3 or 4 at a guess, but these memories still stick with my family and I. I have a very vivid memory of looking outside. It was sunny, but the sky soon became a greenish-yellow haze. The best way to explain this color is like the colors of highly radiated areas in Fallout NV and Fallout 3, a sickly baby dooky green. I sat there curious as to why the color had changed, and didn't mind until I felt unsettled, vulnerable and exposed. I ducked below the window and cried until my eldest sister, we call her Anne, came in to ask me what was wrong. I just told her the sky was scary. She sighed, telling me everything was okay before embracing me. Little did I know the odd experience I witnessed was only a splinter of the activity that came from that house. Anne, my mum, my dad and my brother have very vivid experiences, though only my mum and sister will speak of their events. I'll start with my sisters, as I vaguely remember the incident. We were all in our room that my 2 sisters and I shared. Being like all kids, we were playing and having minor arguments, when Anne suddenly exclaimed for us all to hide. Confused, I obeyed as a sudden urge to just disappear from the odd tension arose. She later told me that when she looked out the window, she saw a grotesque figure approaching. She could tell there was a negative energy around it, and demanded for us to hide as she feared what would happen if it saw us. As she peered from her hiding place, she saw a large golden frog-like eye covering most of the window. Its odd scaly grey-green flesh oozing. It blinked before looking right at her. She said she just felt dread as it smiled, bearing jagged, rotten teeth, and within seconds it was gone. My mum had had a similar experience as Anne. She was outside gardening while we were all indoors, when she had a sudden urge to look up from the garden to see a bipedal frog-like grotesque creature approaching the house from the backyard. My mother is a pretty religious person, and as the creature approached, she started to pray, louder and louder, as the creature came closer. She finished up the Our Father prayer with a strong Amen, and claimed to witness what she called a large bright hand reach down from the sky and hold the creature at bay. Eventually both vanished into thin air, and after that, she also felt a weight on her chest at night, and would hear strange noises from the master bedroom, as well as weird scratches appearing on us kids. The house was unsettling. Now around this time, my stepbrother, we'll call him Arthur, had passed away in a car accident. Arthur was a troubled teen, suffering a lot of abuse from my dad's disturbed ex-wife. He crashed into a tree across from a farm, and the farmer claimed he heard the crash at about 1 a.m. and figured he would check in the morning. At 6 a.m. he saw the accident, ran over only to head back inside to call 911. Arthur was still warm, and it was assumed he'd died maybe 30 minutes before the farmer had decided to check. This wasn't the weird part, though. During this time, a priest that my family was good friends with was visited by Arthur at about 3 a.m. that morning. Arthur woke him up and sat down in a chair in his bedroom, to where he confessed his sins and told the priest things about the home that he would have no idea about, like the back door being tampered with while Arthur was kicked out of the house only 3 days prior to the accident. Arthur was trying to break in to hurt my brother, but couldn't get in, and my mum and dad knew what happened right away and fixed the door. That morning, after the police had called my family, the priest called and asked if Arthur was home. He had come to him during the night to confess his sins and apologize for everything he had done. Most importantly, breaking the back door. My mum wept and told him that my stepbrother had just passed in a car accident, and this shook up my family. The priest was a good family friend, but not close enough to know all about the things Arthur had done, also considering Arthur hadn't been to church in 2 years. A year later, my family had called the priest to help perform an exorcism on the home. He said when he walked in, he instantly felt dread, and my parents believed that home was a portal to hell. There is no way to explain the odd things that happened around that place. We moved out, selling our portal hell home to that priest when he retired, and he took it on as a challenge. I've never had an experience with odd forces again, until I was a freshman at college. And you can doubt me, but I still have a lingering memory of that place and always feeling scared. The original house was way worse, apparently, before my parents had it torn down and a new one stood on the property. And that new house was the one that I grew up in.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.